Here's to the tech visionary who spends his nights debugging code, and my wife. The steak knife froze halfway to my plate when she said it. Ethan's coming over tonight, Julia announced, swirling her wine like she was hosting a talk show. We've been collaborating on something. Private collaborating. That's what she called it. At our dinner table. In our home. A minute later, the doorbell rang. Perfect timing. I set my fork down and smiled. That was the night my marriage crashed harder than any system I'd ever built. Julia and I met 6 years ago at a product launch. She was PR, all polish and control, while I was the quiet software architect in the corner, explaining performance ratios to a reporter who didn't care. She laughed at my awkwardness that night. I thought it meant chemistry. Turns out, it meant amusement. At dinner, she looked radiant in that effortless, curated way that comes from privilege, born into money, raised on influence, and armed with a smile that could deflect accountability like a shield. Across from us, Ethan Caldwell leaned back in his chair, a man who'd built his entire reputation selling vision. He ran Nimbus, a billion-dollar AI startup where Julia handled communications. I'd done freelance back-end work for them once. Small world. Smaller dignity. So, Sam, Ethan said, slicing his steak. Julia tells me you've been between projects lately. Translation, unemployed. Freelance isn't between, I said. It's freedom. He chuckled, glancing at Julia like I was a child trying to explain art to adults. Julia smiled tightly. Sam's always been creative. Creative, I repeated. Right. They talked about user acquisition, branding, and optics while I chewed my food in silence, realizing I wasn't part of the dinner. I was part of the story. The script she'd written to justify her next act. When the plates were cleared, Julia poured more wine. Ethan's staying a while, she said. We're working late. You don't mind, do you? Her tone wasn't a question. It was a dismissal disguised as politeness. I looked at her, the woman who once said she admired my simplicity, now treating it like a flaw. I smiled. Of course not. Then I stood, grabbed my coat, and kissed her on the forehead. Try not to break anything expensive while you work, Ethan laughed. She didn't. I walked out and sat in my car across the street. 20 minutes later, the lights dimmed. His car was still there. The irony was brutal. I'd spent half my career optimizing security systems, yet I'd never installed one at home. That night, I decided to fix that. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my home office, staring at the glow of my monitor while Julia's laughter echoed faintly from upstairs. Every chuckle, every creak in the floorboards. They were like error messages I couldn't fix. Anger is a poor programmer. It rushes, crashes, corrupts data. So, I did what I always do when something breaks. I diagnosed the system. By morning, I had a plan. I started small, bought a Nest camera and installed it in the living room under the guise of security. Then another one disguised as a charger in the study, Julia's favorite work spot. Within days, the footage started uploading to a private cloud account I'd set up under an alias. The truth is rarely cinematic. It's quiet. It's two people whispering about ambition. It's the sound of wine glasses clinking between confessions. Julia, he's a genius. Sam just doesn't see the big picture. Ethan, you're loyal to a fault. Maybe it's time you align with someone who can match you. The kind of corporate seduction that sounds noble until you listen closely enough to hear the deceit in every compliment. When I confronted Julia days later, I didn't accuse her. I just asked questions. How late were you at work last night? She blinked. You keeping tabs now? No, I said calmly. Just curious if passion projects usually end in hotel rooms. Her silence confirmed everything. Then came the deflection. You're paranoid, Sam. I can't help that you feel insecure. Classic gaslight pattern, efficient, predictable. I walked away before I said something I couldn't take back. The next morning, I filed for a temporary leave from my consulting work and began something new. a project I called Reframe. Reframe wasn't revenge at first. It was a database, a living record. I compiled everything: the footage, messages, invoices, call logs, not for court, for clarity. But clarity has a way of evolving into purpose. A week later, a message popped up from my former mentor, Aaron Cole. He'd left Silicon Valley 5 years ago to run a private venture fund in Seattle. "Still wasting your brilliance freelancing?" he wrote. I typed back, "Depends. What's on offer?" He replied with a single line that would change everything: a controlling interest in a quiet company with loud potential. We could use someone who knows code and people. 2 months later, after a series of late-night calls and quiet signatures, I owned 20% of Nimbus, Ethan's company, anonymously, through Aaron's fund. He didn't even know his newest shareholder was the man whose life he'd stepped on to get ahead. The beauty of technology is that control isn't loud. It's invisible, and I was just getting started. Power, I learned, doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it's a login credential, a keystroke, a contract no one reads carefully enough. Aaron and I kept my ownership stake hidden behind layers of NDAs and holding accounts. On paper, Nimbus had gained a private investor. In reality, I had access to internal communication servers, source code branches, and financial dashboards. Ethan Caldwell still swaggered through meetings like he owned the sun. He was the kind of man who believed charisma was intelligence and attention was respect. Julia adored that. I watched her become his shadow, laughing at his jokes, echoing his buzzwords. She'd left subtle clues on social media, tagged locations, champagne selfies, late nights with visionaries. People mistook it for loyalty. I saw it for what it was, like career camouflage. They were expanding Nimbus's AI system into a government data contract. Big money, high visibility, the kind of deal that built billionaires or buried them. Through Aaron, I reviewed every draft proposal, every audit trail. That's when I noticed the numbers didn't add up. Ethan was quietly funneling research funds through a dummy shell called CloudFront Dynamics, the same entity Julia had recently registered as a consulting firm. So she wasn't just cheating, she was laundering his theft. Poetic. I spent weeks gathering data, routing logs, timestamps, metadata chains. All clean, all legal. The truth is, the sharpest blade if you know how to sharpen it. Every evening, I came home to Julia rehearsing her PR lines, completely unaware that the man she thought she'd outgrown was scripting her downfall. "Ethan thinks I should launch my own firm," she said one night. "He says I've got the polish for it." "Polish," I repeated. "Funny word for pretending," she frowned. "You're cruel lately." "Not yet." The next week, Nimbus announced a founders' retreat in Napa Valley. Champagne, cameras, and investors. Perfect optics. "I asked Aaron for an invite." He laughed. "You really want to watch that circus in person?" "I want to study it," I said. The retreat was everything I expected, self-congratulation disguised as innovation. Julia floated around in designer white like a saint of Silicon Valley. Ethan delivered a keynote about transparency in tech, which nearly made me laugh out loud. After dinner, while they mingled, I logged into the AV console. I didn't hack anything. I simply replaced a presentation file. Tomorrow, during the closing remarks, Ethan's slideshow would run exactly as planned until the final minute. Then, for 12 seconds, the truth would flash: Julia's emails, Ethan's transfers. CloudFront Dynamics, 12 seconds would be all it took to crash a kingdom, and the best part? They'd never know where it came from. The next morning, the sun rose over Napa's vineyards like a slow confession. By 9 a.m., the resort's ballroom was filled with investors, journalists, and too much cologne. The closing ceremony was being streamed live to Nimbus's internal network, employees from San Francisco to Singapore tuning in to hear Ethan's vision speech. I stood near the back, coffee in hand, anonymous among the crowd of applause and ambition. Ethan took the stage in his navy suit. grinning with the arrogance of a man convinced his charm could rewrite gravity. Julia sat in the front row, glowing, her phone angled just enough to catch the perfect selfie lighting. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ethan began, "Nimbus isn't just a company. It's a movement built on transparency, ethics, and trust." The irony hit me like music. He clicked to the next slide, revenue graphs, client logos, growth charts. Every investor nodded like trained seals. Then came the last slide, the one I'd rewritten. He pressed next. For 12 seconds, the ballroom turned to silence. The screen filled with an email header from Ethan.Caldwell@nimbus.ai to Julia.Harlow@cloud.frontdynamics.com. Subject, transfer confirmed, route through Zurich. Then came screenshots, transaction receipts. A message from Julia, the shell's clean. No audit trail. We're untouchable, murmurs spread through the room like a virus. Phones came out. Cameras clicked. Julia froze. Ethan went pale, eyes flicking to the tech booth, realizing something had gone horribly, publicly wrong. He stammered. That's not part of... Turn it off. Too late. The live stream had already broadcast it to Nimbus's entire network. Aaron, watching remotely, texted me one word. Perfect. Security scrambled to kill the feed, but the damage was done. Investors whispered. Lawyers started dialing phones. Julia stood up, trembling. "Ethan, what the hell? He cut her off. You did this. You were supposed to..." "No!" she hissed, voice cracking. "You said it was untraceable." The microphones were still live. Every word carried. I walked out quietly. The taste of vindication sharp, but strangely hollow. Outside, the air smelled of crushed grapes and panic. By the afternoon, the news had broken across every major tech outlet: Nimbus executive scandal, internal fraud, and secret shell company exposed during live broadcast. The SEC launched an investigation before sunset. Ethan was suspended pending inquiry. Julia deleted every social account she'd ever curated within hours. At home that night, she stormed into the living room, eyes red. "You think this was me?" she spat. "You think I ruined us?" I looked up from my laptop, calm as glass. "No, Julia, you did that." "I just turned on the lights." She broke then, not from guilt, but from exposure. For people like her, privacy isn't safety. It's status. And I'd taken it away. The next 72 hours were chaos. Nimbus's stock plummeted 43%. The SEC froze assets. Ethan's face was everywhere. TV screens, blogs, podcasts, every exclusive source dissecting his fall from grace. And Julia? She vanished from the spotlight like a deleted post. Our house became quiet again. Not peaceful, just vacant. Her shoes still lined the hallway. Her perfume still lingered in the bedroom. But she moved through it like a ghost, muttering to lawyers over the phone and sobbing between emails. "Sam," she said one night, sitting on the edge of our bed, mascara smudged. "You have to believe me. I didn't know he was using my firm for fraud." "You registered it under your name," I said flatly. "I thought it was legitimate." "He said it was for optics," I finished. She looked up, startled. "How did you—" "I listen when people talk," I said. "It's how I avoid becoming collateral damage." She stared at me for a long time, her eyes narrowing with something between suspicion and horror. "You did this." I didn't answer. She stood, voice trembling. "My career's over. My reputation, everything." "You've ruined me." I looked at her. Really looked. The woman who once measured love in validation, who weaponized charm and treated loyalty like a liability. "I didn't ruin you," I said quietly. I just let the truth upload itself. That broke her composure. She screamed, not words, just pure fury. Then threw the nearest glass against the wall. It shattered like the illusion she'd lived inside for years. By morning, she was gone. Left a note on the counter. I hope this was worth it. It was printed, not handwritten. Like everything else in her life, curated, soulless, transactional. A week later, Ethan was arrested for securities fraud and obstruction. His bail hearing streamed online. Julia's name appeared in the filings. Cooperative witness. She traded pride for immunity. Typical. Aaron called the same night. You're free, you know. They'll never trace it back to you. Wasn't planning to hide, I said. Just moving on, he chuckled. You've got options now. Nimbus is restructuring. You technically own 20%. The board's looking for someone to stabilize what's left. For a moment I said nothing. The irony was too perfect. The man who'd once been mocked at a dinner table was now being asked to rebuild the empire of the man who mocked him. Tell them yes, I said, finally. But I won't rebuild it. I'll redesign it. That night, I poured myself a drink and stared out at the San Francisco skyline, that glittering illusion of power and innovation. Everyone here thought success was about who could rise fastest. They forgot that gravity works both ways. 6 months later, the city forgot their names. Ethan Caldwell became another cautionary headline, the once golden founder turned felon. His assets were liquidated, his movement dismantled. He'd traded TED Talks for testimony. Julia resurfaced in Los Angeles under a new last name, doing low-level PR work for small lifestyle brands. Every so often an old friend from the valley would mention her in passing. She's changed, they'd say, but I knew better. People like Julia don't change. They adapt. As for me, I became the interim CEO of Nimbus. Temporarily, they said. The board liked me because I didn't talk much. Investors liked me because I didn't pretend. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man they once mocked for not thinking big enough now controlled the very machine that had humiliated him. But I didn't rebuild Nimbus to prove anything. I rebuilt it to purge it. I stripped away the vanity projects, the fake moral branding, the empty slogans about transparency. And when the media asked me what the new direction was, I said, we're not chasing growth. We're chasing integrity. They laughed at first, but the market didn't. The company stabilized, quietly, honestly. One night, after a long day of meetings, I walked along the Embarcadero. The bay wind was sharp, and the city lights reflected on the water like broken glass. Beautiful, but dangerous to touch. I thought about Julia, about how I used to equate silence with weakness. Now I knew better. Silence is control. Silence is choice. My phone buzzed. I'm an unknown number. A message. I saw the article about you. You won, Sam. I hope you're happy. Jay, I stared at it for a while. Then typed back, happiness was never the goal. And I deleted the thread. The next morning, a young intern stopped me in the hallway. Mr. Harlow, is it true what you said to the press? That truth is the new profit? I smiled faintly. Something like that. She nodded, thoughtful, before walking away. That was the first time I realized my revenge had outgrown me. It wasn't about Julia anymore. Or Ethan. It was about rebuilding something honest in a place that worshipped lies. At home that night, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and opened my old laptop. The one that had captured everything. The videos, the messages, the receipts. My archive of betrayal. I hovered over the folder labeled Reframe and pressed Delete. The progress bar filled slowly, 1%, 23%, 74%, until it was gone. Not erased, just finished. As the screen went black, I whispered to no one in particular. She turned my life into an exhibit. I just made sure the crowd stayed long enough to read the fine print. The city outside kept glowing, indifferent, relentless, alive. And for the first time in a long while, so was I.